Hello, my name's Florence. Welcome to the theobspod. I'm an NHS obstetrician, hoping to share some thoughts and experiences about my working life. Perhaps you enjoy Call the Midwife, maybe birth fascinates you, or you're simply curious about what exactly an obstetrician is. You might be pregnant and preparing for birth. Perhaps you work in maternity and want to know what makes your obstetric colleagues tick, or you want some fresh ideas and inspiration. Whichever of these is the case, and for that matter, anyone else that's interested, the theobspod is for you. Episode 141, Flourish. Very excited to have my first ever guest in my air quotes studio here.
Am I your first ever?
So, because I've done other people on Zoom.
Right.
So Kate, being Kate, has come to my proper studio to join me on the theobspod.
Well, it's an honour.
And it's absolutely brilliant because we're going to talk about her book, Flourish. So, Kate, perhaps you could tell everyone a bit about who you are.
Yeah, well, I am a midwife working in southwest London, and I work on a continuity of care team. And I come from a background of both coaching and also other kinds of birth work. So before I became a midwife, I was 10 years as a doula. I'd been 15 years as an antenatal teacher. And I did all of that alongside my coaching. And my coaching was primarily working with people who are reimagining their work lives. So I've worked for a long time with women who are rediscovering who they want to be, particularly after some years of mothering. And more recently with leaders in the NHS and in other areas of healthcare who are pioneering in what they do and want to kind of shake up the systems they work in.
Excellent. And we first met when you were chair of Kingston MVP, I think, which is it's going back quite a long time now.
2014 at the Who's Shoes event, maybe.
Yes.
Even before that. I'm not sure which came first. But I was involved with the MVP since 2006 with a bit of a gap in between. So, probably 2010, 2011, something like that.
Which, now I think about it, it's a really long time. Yeah. Really long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we definitely connected then. And then, it's been really nice actually watching you kind of go through your different roles actually. And I remember when you came and gave me a massage when I was doing my lithotomy challenge.
Yeah. Which year was that?
That was 2014.
Okay.
It might have been the beginning of 2015.
Yeah.
And I remember that because you were focused on me as a person, and that was just, it really spoke to me. You were like the only person that was seeing me as a person rather than a performance.
Yes, and people coming in and out of the room and just sort of looking at you.
Yeah, exactly. And that was lovely. And then I remember when you were thinking about doing midwifery, and I was like, ooh, yes, definitely. And now it's such a treat because I get to work with you.
Yeah. Double bonus, right?
Exactly.
Mondays on Labour Ward sometimes.
So yeah, it's been really great following you. And then the next amazing thing you've done is publish this book, Flourish, which is what we're going to talk about today. So I was lucky enough to have a little bit of a preview of Flourish. And we're going to talk about the book. There's two parts to the book, aren't there?
Yeah.
And the first part, perhaps if you explain a little bit about that.
Great. So the first part is designed to really bring out and name the psychological realities of the work that we do. And I'm going to say in midwifery, but I also mean in maternity. And I very specifically gave the book the title Flourish, a practical and emotional guidebook to thriving in midwifery, because I was trying to create the space for midwives to have something that kind of belonged to them, to us. However, all the issues apply across maternity support workers, obstetricians, obviously, and anyone else who's working in that kind of field. So the first part really gives a vocabulary for what I call the 5 mega mountains. So they're the things that are very much present in our everyday. So trauma exposure, burnout, moral injury, potential for PTSI, and then compassion fatigue or empathic strain. So they're the 5 mountains. And I go through those partly because there is so little spoken of them, but also because there is no clear vocabulary. And it is out there in the research, but it just doesn't translate down into the midwife on the ground. So midwives will end up saying, I'm not cut out for this. I can't do this. Something in me is wrong. I don't match what I'm seeing in other people. How is it they can do this and I can't? When actually what's happening is unacknowledged traumatic stress. And I really wanted to make that clear.
I think you have achieved that. I think the biggest take home from the book was, oh my God, this is all stuff I recognise, but we never talk about. Or we talk about a little bit maybe when something bad happens.
Yeah.
Then we'll acknowledge it a bit. Oh, that person's off sick, or it's a bit stressful, or we'll maybe have a bit of a conversation. But the day-to-day, not at all. It's just all brushed under the surface, and we're dealing with short staffing or very stressful emotional situations of all kinds of different challenges, whether that is a very positive birth experience or a very difficult birth experience, or conflict within a team, or difficulty with perhaps a partner or family members.
Or just being exposed to the stories of families. Some of this can happen in a secondary fashion, just through reading reports or, engaging with families and their real lives.
Yes.
And just encountering that kind of exposure.
Yes.
Or through other people's stories. Because we love a story, don't we?
We
and
do.
It's one of our ways of processing sometimes quite challenging, confronting things, is to tell other people about it. And then for others to tell other people about it. And I talk in the book about this kind of story sliming, and how easy it is to end up in that situation where there's no consent been sought or gained for telling a story, but actually we can be really profoundly affected by it.
Yes.
Especially the stories that keep coming, the ones that say some quite graphic things about, and I'm not necessarily going to say it right now because I don't want to do it to the listeners, but they become hooks in the mind.
Yeah.
And we can almost visualize them before they happened.
Yeah, I'm interested in what you said, and there's a lovely little drawing in the book of the I'm not cut out for this, and there's like a little paper drawing of a person with some scissors snipping them out, and that, to me, I love that. I'm a very visual thinker, so I love that. But definitely when I was more junior, and even as a consultant, I have been told many times, you care too much, Florence. You're too emotional.
Yeah.
And, don't get so upset. And I think I never saw that as a strength. I saw being upset as a weakness, and I would cry, and I've always been a crier my whole life, and I would cry at work, but I would also come home and cry on my husband and my children.
Yeah.
And therefore bring some of that psychological stress and stuff back home as well. But the idea that actually I might not be the right person for that job didn't really kind of come across in my mind. But definitely other people would say, well, you just care too much.
So by implication, something's not quite aligned.
Not right. It's not, you shouldn't be that. I guess it's the mountain of that sort of disengagement and sort of depersonalisation,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yeah, and actually it's a feature of burnout. It's one of the definitions from the WHO of burnout is that depersonalisation.
Yeah, and people would say to me, well, you care too much. And I was thinking, well, why don't you care? Like,
and sometimes
how can you not care? And then I would get
compassion.
really quite angry.
Yeah.
So just before we started recording, you were talking about the fact that a lot of midwives qualifying now are young, very young, and to be dealing with all this when you're in your early 20s.
And in your first job ever.
Yes.
You know, where you haven't worked elsewhere and haven't necessarily experienced other work environments. It's quite something.
Yeah, massive. So when you set out to write the book...
Yeah.
I know we're slightly going backwards now, but what was your vision? So you very kindly invited me to the launch last week, which was a fabulous event. It was like a massive Kate appreciation and celebration. It was so lovely listening to all your friends and people talk about you in such a warm way. But you spoke about, I was in the shower and I had this idea. So tell me a bit about what sparked that.
Well, it was the last day of 2020, so obviously we'd had quite a year already, and we were just going into that Delta wave, you know, the second big wave, and about to go into another lockdown. And it was that night when none of us went out, where we all had quiet nights in with our family. And I'd been for a walk with my husband that afternoon, came back, had a shower, and I just felt this idea drop in. And I'm a Christian, so I firmly believe that these things happen and that sometimes I just get given ideas. And the idea was, I'm going to write a little book and it's going to bring together my midwifery and my coaching work. And it's going to be for the benefit of midwives. And that was it. But what happened, of course, in January, February, March was that very intense period of women being incredibly unwell with COVID and staff having to make really difficult decisions, ethical decisions about delivery and, you know, intensive care and all of that for mother and baby. And just the sense of kind of distancing from ourselves that was happening in the midst of deep COVID, when no one expected us to go into another lockdown, and there we were. And no one expected, you know, women to get so ill, and there they were. And it was the perfect breeding ground for my processing, I suppose, and also the research I was doing. It created a kind of perfect storm, and it made me go, right, I'm going to write this. I'm going to describe what's happening. Of course, it wasn't about COVID. The book isn't about COVID, but it was such an acute period. You could see it all in Technicolor.
Yeah. So we've kind of talked about the first part of the book, and you mentioned bringing together midwifery and coaching. And I think that's, apart from the acknowledgement, and we really need to start talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's the second half of the book where it's just, oh my God, wow. This could be a game changer in terms of practical things that people can do, whether it's a midwife on her own, whether it's a group of midwives on a shift, whether it's a multidisciplinary team, but so many ideas, like you say, that have come from coaching that might help us navigate some of these problems.
Yeah.
And not only start to have the conversation, but start to deal with it and process it, like you're saying.
Yeah.
So kind of how did you start organising some of those thoughts about, okay, this is the problem, now what's the solution? What can we usefully give people to do? Because I'm really struck by, and you'll know this from work, the emails at work, there's a wellbeing session, come and do this, that and the other, tick boxy, we're trying to look after you, or at least we're trying to demonstrate we're looking after you, but actually we're not really looking after you. So we're simultaneously going to tell you we've put on 10 yoga sessions, but we're not going to allow you to go and have a cup of tea or a lunch break. So the book for me is much more, actually, we really are going to try and look after ourselves.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of make it more meaningful like that, I suppose?
I guess the first thing is, in relation to that thing about yoga sessions, etc., and just well-being efforts, is that I do have compassion for leaders in maternity who are trying to figure out a way. And in fact, right up front in the book is a love letter to midwifery and maternity leaders.
Yeah, I read that today.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really good idea and
because
really nice.
That is what I feel. It's what I believe. I know that people are doing their very best and feel a helplessness. And I know that partly because I just know where people's good intentions are, but I also have talked to some people, directors of midwifery and others, who have expressed it to me. And I just wanted people to know that it's not about saying you're not doing this for us, but actually, like, we're in this, we have these things we haven't been talking about. How do we start the conversation together? How do we build something that is realistic but at the same time really practical? And starting with, what does psychological safety look like at work? So, and that's not saying let's try these bits and do these exercises necessarily, but it is saying who are the leaders that we have on the ground, on the shift floor. What does it mean for them to start the shift in a way that builds psychological safety? And that might mean being vulnerable themselves and, explaining that they're not feeling great that night because their mum's not well, or whatever it is that's going on in their life, so that their staff can feel like they too can say, I don't feel great either. And here we are, third night in a row. Yeah. It's quite full on, isn't it? And I might need to ask for more from you tonight.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's almost like the invitation in the handover or another setting to be vulnerable enough with each other that we can say, I don't know, or I can't, or I've made a mistake, or I might make a mistake. Enough so that people can feel like they belong. Yeah. And are not just sort of fitting in to the numbers. And actually, I talk in the book, and this is all in part 1, about the fruit and bicycles approach, which the podcast, Dr. Rachel Morris, ex-GP, now coach, who has the podcast You Are Not a Frog, excellent podcast. She talks about that in terms of what hospitals try to do, GP surgeries as well, in trying to cater for well-being. And that is tick box, right? Here's a basket of fruit. Yeah. We rarely say basket of fruit, but we did during COVID. Yeah. And here's the cycle to work scheme. Yeah. And it's very easy to slip into that, isn't it? And go, well, we're doing these things, and you sort of list your initiatives. Yeah. But access to them is completely different. Yeah. How do we access, in the middle of a shift, that, that yoga session, but equally, how do we even access that professional midwifery advocate or other person within well-being who's said, come and see me? Because we know we can't. There's no scope. We know it has knock-on consequences for ourselves and for our colleagues if we were to do that. So it's about how do we integrate these things into the very much day-to-day, as well as think about the systems and structures. And all the way through, we're thinking on those levels of what's the system, what about the team, and who am I as an individual within that.
Yeah, I think that's the other sort of aspect that I thought was really useful is, with the maternity improvement work I've done, I'm very focused on, particularly also because I've been in hospital management. I know it's not easy, and I know there are limited resources. Yeah. So what can you as an individual do? You can make small changes. Yeah. And in fact, when I was kind of flicking through things this afternoon, I wrote down the tiny habits bit, and that idea of, well, what can I do myself that already makes me safer and more positive and using the right mindset, and then how can I then do that within a shift or within a clinic or whatever it is I'm doing.
that tiny habits exercise, which is in part 2, one of the ideas for a tiny habit is, as you slide your key into the car ignition, or, you know, stand on the station platform on the commute, the first thing you do is, you know, maybe express, I'm grateful that, and actually it's the other way around. It's as you arrive, so it's on the way to work, I'm grateful that, and just naming, you know, 2 or 3 things that you're grateful for, that you're going to encounter that night or day. I'm talking about night shifts because they loom particularly large in my mind, and that might be, I'm going to have a well-stocked labour ward cupboard. Lucky me. Wow, how incredible to have access to the drugs I need, or whatever it is. I'm going to have some really good conversations with my colleagues at some point, and I get to, whatever it is, you know, engage with a family one-to-one tonight. Yes, there are high expectations and there might be stresses going on elsewhere, but my priority is to be able to be with them, and I get to do that. So again, as you say, just like, and starting us off from a place of this is possible, and then being able to kind of use that to generate some connection and possibility for others. I think, but without being falsely positive. You know, it's not about that.
That's definitely resonated with me, because so I'm very fortunate. I'm allowed to park at work, so I get to work, and it's not that unusual when I arrive for me to sit in the car for a bit, trying to psych myself up to get out the car and go and start my day.
Right.
And particularly at the moment, you know, we're recording this with NHS strikes and still massive staffing crisis and etc. But I'm not using that time to think good things like that. I'm sitting there thinking, come on, Florence, gather yourself up and get in through the door.
Right. Yeah.
You know. And sometimes, and that's not every day, but some days I think it's back to relationships, isn't it? Because if I know, I've got this woman today that I'm going to see, and I've got a relationship with her, or I'm going to do this team meeting, or I'm going to work with this trainee, then again, it's that hook that I've got something positive to think about. Rather than just, I'm turning up to be almost part of the machinery. I mean, I was talking to some of the midwives at the book launch, and we were talking about not only the sort of task orientated thing that you've talked about in the book, but also we're cogs in this big machine. And we're no longer seen as humans ourselves.
There's an illustration in part 1 that is a number talking to a number. So, and it's you know, the team lead that day or night saying, you're with you're with room 10. Number 8, you're with room 10. And of course, you know, she or he is not going to use the name number 8, but that's how it can feel.
Totally.
So it's to try and guard against that. It's to place us in relationship, isn't it? Those thoughts. And there's also an exercise around unpacking the bag at the end of the day, and that's the mental bag with the load that we carry. And sort of taking things out metaphorically and having a look at them, and then choosing what we're taking back into our homes. And maybe choosing one thing that we really want to take back home and talk about, and that'll be our thing. So rather than it being, really hard day, going, hard day, and this happened, which is quite hard to name when it's all weighed down with the other stuff.
That's a really interesting idea.
And then actually repacking the bag, and this could be used, you know, if you're lucky enough to get some lunch, or, you know, in a re-energizing moment, to just go, okay, how do I put some of the things that are going to give me energy back in my stores so that I can go out and face the rest of the day.
No, that's really good. I think this is the thing. I'm just going to have to dip in and out of it a lot.
And it is
because it's
the second half is kind of designed like that.
Yeah, yes, it is.
And for midwives to work through either on their own or with a small group or just a pair, you know, a good friend, and to go, oh, I like that one, I'm going to try that.
Yes.
And let's try, you know, let's both try that and compare, or I'll try that this week and then next week I'll try something different, and just sort of feel it out.
Yeah. I think the other thing, which I said to you when you arrived this evening, is I kind of realised that I'd done quite a few of the things, but by accident.
Yeah.
Always.
Well, you've had plenty of experience and plenty of opportunity.
But it's
to need to
but
find
I
a
don't
way.
even know that's what I'm doing, if you sort of mean. It's just the way I've managed to cope. And one of my key kind of things now, we were talking about my dog, who's very kindly gone to sleep, and the fact that I get up early and I go with my husband and with my dog for a walk
every day,
just half an hour every day before I go to work. Doesn't matter what the weather is, and I always get up and think, why am I doing this? I could leave him to do this. I don't need to do this. I'm getting up half an hour earlier so I can do this. But by the end of that half an hour, I'm ready for my day. I'm awake. I'm engaged. Last year I did a whole course about recognising bird song. So I'm like listening, thinking, what's that bird?
Brilliant.
Recognising it. The leaves are all exploding at the moment. There's the passing of the seasons, the difference in the light, but I'm alive and in that moment properly before I set off to work. And I think that has a massive impact on my ability to then go in and deal with, you know, whatever's chucked at me.
And to work in a fluorescent environment with, you know, very few windows for the rest of the day as well. I mean, that's not to be underestimated. Just that our physical environment affects us. And there's so much evidence now to show that green and, you know, extra oxygen from the trees and all of that is having this positive effect.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because we do become very disconnected. I definitely come out of work quite often and come home, or a friend will ring me or whatever, and they'll say, oh, weather today was dreadful, or it was beautiful. It was a beautiful day. And I'm like, was it?
I'm sure
I have no idea.
Yeah.
You know? So, that no windows is a big deal to me, I think.
Especially in the winter when
you go in the dark and you come out in the dark. Yeah. So we've talked about a few sort of ideas, and the book is chock-a-block with ideas, but people have got to get the book and think about the ideas. So I know you've got a little sort of strategy up your sleeve for how do we get midwives and the book connected, as it were.
Yeah, well, a couple of ways. The first one is just to go to the website, which is flourishformidwives.com. And the aim of that is to give the background, obviously, but also to enable people to read the story directly before they then get the book on there. But also I've turned what is the chapter on trauma exposure and kind of gathered it together into a trauma exposure poster, which some people might be interested in embedding in their own maternity units.
Oh, okay.
And it would be in conjunction with, you know, helping, supporting for really robust processes post-exposure.
Right.
So what does it mean to be really psychologically safe with your team?
I loved your description of what might happen. What if?
Yeah.
That just felt like a dream.
Yeah, so that was the induction thing that I read, wasn't it?
Yes.
What would it be like if we welcomed staff with this? Which is it's a sort of, we recognise that what you do is hard.
Yes.
And if and when, because actually when there is an incident involving you, this is how we're going to treat it and be with you. But then there's more in the in the section on trauma exposure and PTSI in the brain, and particularly a section on how our brilliant brains manage those episodes, you know, trying desperately to file the memories, but it's like a wardrobe which is sort of bursting at the seams, and the only way that our brain can cope is to keep sort of reasserting it and saying, I still haven't filed it. And so it's normal for up to a month to get those very visceral pictures, which I'm sure you know well, and that actually, if we know that, we don't have to be scared of those. We don't have to think this is me done, you know. Yes. I'm never going to be rid of this. Am I going crazy? You know, people think that. And instead, the poster is designed to be like a Sharps exposure poster. Go in the sluice, go on the poster boards, so that we can expect that where we're involved in something significant, we're going to experience some of those things as our brains try and sort it out. And we've got confidential routes to get the help we need straight away. So the idea is in any healthcare facility, actually, but obviously I'm targeting maternity units, people can say, yeah, we need that, so that we can signpost our staff and help them know what's normal. And obviously if someone crosses that point of about a month and is still having those very intrusive thoughts, then a different kind of support is needed psychologically. But that's on the website. And then the idea of connecting midwives with parents is also on there under books for midwives. So the idea is there are thousands, hundreds of thousands a year of happy parents in this country who love their midwife because they're soaked with oxytocin as they give birth, and they love their obstetrician too if they've seen one, but they want to think about what can I give to my midwife to say thank you. And we're very grateful for the chocolates that we receive, and we get a lot of hand cream, so we've got very soft hands, and very, you know, significant bellies sometimes as well.
Well, you haven't, but yes,
sitting here like this. But the idea is, what if a parent was able to go on the website and get a book for their maternity unit? They wouldn't necessarily be able to give it directly to their midwife, although they could if they named them. But to connect via local bookshops who can then deliver the books to the local maternity unit, benefiting small businesses and enabling midwives and MSWs, and support workers, maternity assistants, and student midwives to have the book in their hands so that everyone can use it. That's the idea.
So that is just my big hope is this kind of tidal wave kind of washing over maternity services and changing it, because I think that, I mean, I knew you were writing this book, but it definitely has exceeded my expectations in terms of not only, I know it's focused on midwives, but it felt to me like very real, tangible stuff that all members of the team could really do with. And just not understanding what's happening to us. And I see that with junior doctors. I have to sit with my supervisees and help them write their statements, and they're anxious and they're worried, and just even being kinder to myself about, actually, that was a really difficult birth or a very difficult operation, and actually it's not surprising it's taking me time to work through. I mean, I remember doing a horrendous case many years ago, which I won't talk about in detail because it'd be too identifiable, but I remember being very traumatised by that. When I went to the kind of debrief organised, I was the only person that cried, and I felt a bit like, oh, there's obviously something wrong with me. And then I went to the labour ward and I was asked to do an almost identical case, and I literally just broke down. I couldn't do it, and I walked off the ward, and everyone was like, oh, Florence is having a bit of a hissy fit and saying she won't do this case. And it's like, no, it's 10 days since I had this very, very traumatic event and I'm not ready yet. And then since then I've done many more and it's been fine. But at that point in time, there was no acknowledgement or understanding at all that you wouldn't just be able to snap to it and carry on.
And that's the dehumanization, isn't it? That's the feeling of like, it's not just who we have in front of us, but you represent the number that night or day. And therefore you have to, you know, it's your job to step in no matter what. Yeah, so there's actually a chapter in part 1 which is called When Midwives Give Birth, because there's this process both ways going on where midwives who are already midwives are carrying stuff, baggage, stories from their midwifery into their births, potentially, unless they're given a chance to kind of process that. And then the other way around, coming out the other way, what happens when a midwife's given birth and their experience of giving birth is then translated into the midwifery practice. And we don't know anything about that because absolutely no research has been done on it. So I just asked some provocative questions about that, and also put another what if into that. You know, what if we were to support people to really explore their experience of giving birth, or before they give birth, their experience of being a midwife and now a pregnant woman about to give birth. And just throw all that up in the air and, you know, suggest that we really start thinking about it.
And I can't believe that there's no research on that. I mean, that is
amazing.
That is quite astonishing. And when you talk about that, I'm thinking well, you know, I've talked about it. My birth experiences have definitely shaped me as an obstetrician.
And mine as a midwife.
So the idea that, because you bring your whole self to work, at least you hopefully do. And so that is part and parcel of you, isn't it? And how you make sense of that, whether that's good or bad. It's really important. So to finish, because we could literally talk forever, I feel. I feel like there might be some more episodes in this somehow. Or certainly the kind of next phases of your journey, or our journey together doing things. So we're thinking about a zesty bit. So Kate, what would your zesty bit be for people listening?
The zesty bit is a wow bit. Like, wow, what if engaging in a tiny piece of change in the system was to re-empower some of the midwives in this country? And that's not me saying you must, or indeed saying go on, act even though you're overwhelmed. Not at all. That's me saying I get where you are, probably. And what we know from the research is that when you find your people, your tribe, the people who are also wanting to shape something different within maternity, even if it's really tiny, and I use the example of, like, how can we be with a couple more effectively in the theatre? You know, what does it mean to really be with women in the theatre environment? That's just one example, but all through the book there are examples of tiny little projects that people might be interested in picking up. And there's an invitation there to do that, to find your people, to pick up something that you're interested in and then run with it. And there's just a few pages on, like, how to engage with change, how to, you know, start communicating about it, how to bring people along. And it's exciting to just, you know, imagine midwives around the country being released into that, and to give student midwives, again, that sense of empowerment to begin to have those conversations even before they've qualified.
Yeah, I think that just fits in so much with everything I try and do in terms of trying to kind of just chip away a little bit and try and, I can't change the world, but I can change the way I talk to a woman or the way I role model something or the way I behave. And maybe for me, my zesty bit is, well, I need to go into work and actually start acknowledging the situation we're in and try and help people feel they can talk about it. I mean, I had better conversations with some of the midwives at the launch event last week, who I work with every day, than I did do normally at work, because this was the subject on everybody's mind, you know.
Yeah.
And that's, in a way, that's quite sad. I mean, it was really great to have that opportunity, but I feel like, well, you know, I need to talk to them more and get them to appreciate I am interested in how they are as a person on any given day.
Which you would also want from them. I mean,
exactly.
That's so important, isn't it?
Yeah.
That we have that kind of relationship where we can, you know, understand a little bit about each other's histories and just
exactly.
relate, you know, as humans.
Yeah.
All doing something that's quite difficult and all trying to bring it together at the right moment.
Yeah.
And we know that it's safer if we've had those kind of conversations before
definitely,
as well.
Definitely. No, and I definitely had, I did have a real grump moment, not this Monday, last Monday, when I just felt completely overwhelmed at the handover with multiple things going on and not enough staff, and some of the staff being brand new, and the midwife in charge, she was great. She went off and bought me coffee and was like, I know you need this, Florence. And, you know, it was just kind of, I was thinking, oh, thank God someone's looking after me.
Yeah.
You know? So just having those little conversations of actually, not only do I care about the women, but I care about you, the staff. I had a lovely conversation with a student midwife yesterday. And I think that's one of the reasons why I do this podcast, let's face it, is it opens up conversations with people. So either women coming into my clinic saying, oh, I listened to this, that and the other, and it was really helpful. But I had 2 conversations yesterday with staff at work, one in the car park, and one on the labour ward, who were like, oh yes, I'm really enjoying your podcast, can I ask you about this, that and the other?
Right.
And then it just connects us. So trying to connect with each other at work on a bit more of a human basis, and then try and use the tools that you've, you know, generously put out there for us to try and grapple with some of this stuff. If we start chipping away at those mountains, maybe it'll move them.
Well, it's knowing they're there,
make them smaller,
of all, isn't it? That's the start. It's having the map, knowing that they're there, and yes, the tools for climbing and, you know, acclimatizing, but also going, yes, they're there. Yes, there's going to be moments where I'm right in the midst of it, or moments where a colleague is and I can relate differently because I know how to name it. Brilliant.
Thank you ever so much. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you.
Real treat to be here in your studio.
Yes, with all its sound effects and everything else. But no, it's been a real joy. So thank you very much. And good luck with the book. And like I said, I hope there's a kind of a wave of positivity and kind of hope.
Yeah, hope.
As a result.
Hope's definitely right at the heart of
it. Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I very much hope you found this episode of the theobspod interesting. If you have, it'd be fantastic if you could subscribe, rate and review on whatever platform you find your podcasts, as well as recommending the theobspod to anyone you think might find it interesting. There's also tons of episodes to explore in my back catalogue, from clinical topics, my career and journey as an obstetrician, and life in the NHS more generally. I'd like to assure women I care for that I take confidentiality very seriously and take great care not to use any patient identifiable information unless I have expressly asked the permission of the person involved on that rare occasion when it's been absolutely necessary. If you found this episode interesting and want to explore the subject a little more deeply, don't forget to take a look at the programme notes where I've attached some links. If you want to get in touch to suggest topics for future episodes, you can find me at theobspod on Twitter and Instagram, and you can email me theobspod@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.